Okay, so I'd like to present Dr. Alan Ojig Corbiere, Anishinaabe from Ching First Nation, is an assistant professor in Indigenous History of North America at York University. So his work centers on Anishinaabe language revitalization, Indigenous history, and treaty research, with a focus on using culturally based methods to preserve and teach Ojibway. Dr. Corbiere has spearheaded language programs, both within his community and online, demonstrating his deep commitment to preserving the Ojibway language and history for future generations. So without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Alan Ojig Corbiere.
Somebody left me a note here. Nanabojo Anishinaabe dok ninso jik benendo dem chiging jinkade wishkunagan nenjabaya migo geni we kweje Nishinabem kamshe ndo neta Nishinabem si kamshe moshkin the Nishinabem si. So myself, I'm a learner too, and I try to speak, but it's always good to hear and visit with people that are fully fluent, like what my friend here, Nelson, said. We have a challenging time just because there's so much to learn, and we got to work together a bit more than we are, especially with our language. And we got to kind of pull out all the stops here. Use every tool and resource that we can to its full extent and capacity. Sometimes we will disparage writing. Sometimes we'll use writing. But learners should be given the chance to find what works best for them. So I'll stay on the soapbox a bit more. Just kidding. I need the PowerPoint. Yeah. So one of the things that I guess George Dashangi mi nik mabasema, Jeba Dashangi mi nik mabasema, Sam Mendawabit ngi mi nik. So this tobacco was given to me by Sam Manitowabi. And to come and talk a bit, and I worked on this quite a bit, and it kind of made me laugh. I was laughing a bit because I talked somewhere else, and they said, after I was done, they said, "You already said that. You told us that last year or the year before." And then somebody else come up and said, yeah, my elders told me that. And I was like, well, that's why we call it an oral tradition, and it bears repeating. And I'm glad you remembered it. I wanted to say I'm glad you remembered it, so that next year or 2 years now, you can do it. And that's what we want people to share together, talk together. We got to talk together. So we got to share, talk to each other about what we know. Because one of the things that I tell people, and this I told people this that it was a Toronto, and it was one of these youth conferences, and I was telling the youth, I asked them, how many of you have a grandparent that still speaks Anishinaabe? So not many put their hand up now, and I was a bit surprised, but not many were able to put their hand up. Some did, and then that's what I said, record them. And I said, imagine if all of you came here and you all had a story from your grandparents, one of your grandparents, your grandma, your grandpa, and you worked on understanding that story in Anishinaabe, and you wrote it down and you started to understand it. And if we think of this as all of you here, same thing, and you put that all in the middle, all of what we know, how much more we would have if you all did that and brought that here to this, what we would now call council fire. And that's what that means when you bring that in. You bring that to a council fire, you're going to bring something to talk about. So if we all came and we brought something to talk about and we put it in the middle and we had that fire there in the middle, and we burnt our tobacco and we put that gish conduct in there to send that up, then how much more we actually would have and how much more we would actually start to understand. But what we end up doing is we kind of, we don't record our people, we don't record our elders, and we're letting that go. And that's the hard part, is we're letting that go, and we shouldn't be letting it go, is basically the message. Znagat we Anishinaabe mot eshkinwet eshkinigajik. Znagat we Anishinaabe mot eshkinigajik. So sometimes it's hard for them, and it was hard for me, and it's still hard for me. But you got to try every day and work at it every day. And I don't like that guy, Nin dash guy dash shigen the zinwe kidwin Ojibway word of the day, as we've been trying that so long, and you just then it's like, oh, here's that word again, and I still don't know it. And this is next year or the year later. You got to actually try and do more phrases rather than words of the day. And you actually got to try and practice that and make your mistakes. And sometimes the mistakes, that's where the bigger learning is. And it's harder to stand up. So nui miigwechua maba kwe. So I want to thank this young lady. She come up and introduced herself in Anishinaabe, and it was I can tell that she's learning, and so but it's being brave to come up and do that. So anyway, I'm supposed to talk about treaty. I easily get off track. So these ones on the screen, these are paintings of our leaders, different leaders we've had through the years, but these ones signed the 1850 treaty. And the one in the red coat, though, he signed the Robinson Superior Treaty. And then the one up in the your upper right, he also signed Lake Superior Treaty. So these are paintings of our leaders, and most of these paintings were done by a fellow named Paul Kane. And then two of them were done by a fellow named Krieghoff. And then one was that sketch of Jean-Baptiste Siganok that was done by Father Nicolas Point. And he was living at Weequampong at the time when they did that sketch. So I was playing around, like I was telling you, I was playing around, and there's my fancy part. This, I tried to get my kids to help me, but they won't help me with this kind of stuff and jazz it up. So they asked me to talk about leadership roles and responsibilities, and I was, Gike Nanagadawendan, Anish Moki and Sastawagwa Gonda Nijanishnabek. How am I going to help them to understand this? And even myself, I was like, well, how do I understand this? Roles and responsibilities. And one of the things, of course, is one of the words I really liked, because people will ask, well, how do you say responsibility? and I don't know how to say that myself. But this one, Bejignishnaabe Odem Chiging Enjabat, Natan Nishnaabe Momaba Nishnaabe, Stuart Roy Jinkaza. So he named this one program in Chiging, and it was a literacy program for people that didn't finish high school. They're coming back to school. Gabmondadis was what he called that program. And when I saw that word, and I was like, oh, that's ever a good word. And that means I will carry it myself on my back. I'll carry that load myself on my back. So I thought of that as kind of a responsibility as well, that, I'm going to pick that up and I'm going to carry it. But somebody else here probably has a good word for responsibility, but that was one way I liked how they actually talked about it. This is a fella named Peter Jones, and Mabadash Peter Jones, Mrs. Augie Giawe. Meanwhile, Dash Gi Nopanadon Jagnashi Jitwawin. This fella, he's a Mississauga Anishinaabe, and he ended up becoming a Methodist missionary. He was a missionary. But he could speak Anishinaabe fluently, and his mother was Anishinaabe Kwe, and his father was a Jagnash, Augustus Jones. And Augustus Jones was a surveyor. And in Anishinaabe, we say, the Baki'u'inene, the Baki'u'inene. That's the surveyor. Anyway, that was his father. So he becomes this missionary, and then he writes a book. And as a historian, you read these books because he's a fervent believer as a Methodist. And he fervently believes in the 1830s to his death, Ojibway 1860 Ginbo Maba. Before 1860, this fella passed away. I forget the date when he passed away. Anyway, he ends up fervently believing this because at that time, Miwepti Nishnaabek Geekche Minikwewat. They were just drinking, and that Gimi Gadawat. They're fighting each other, they're drinking, and even they're killing each other. So he turned to, the only outlet at that time that he could turn to was Methodism. Anyway, he writes this book, so when you read this, you got to actually try and sort out when he's talking about his Methodism, his fervent belief in that, and then also what he's actually talking about what the Anishinaabe believe, because sometimes he'll end up couching it in not so nice terms. But he says here, the chiefs of each tribe settle all the disputes which arise among the people. They watch over their territories, regulate the order of their marches, and appoint the time of their general rendezvous. This generally takes place after sugar making, or about the 1st of May, when they have their grand powwow dances and various games. So the Indian form of government is patriarchal. So he means patrilineal. And after the manner of the ancients, the chiefs are the heads or fathers of their respective tribes. But their authority extends no further than to their own body. While their influence depends much on their wisdom, bravery, and hospitality, when they lack any of these qualities, they fall proportionably in the estimation of their people. It is therefore of importance then that they should excel at everything pertaining to the dignity of a chieftain, since they govern more by persuasion than by coercion. Whenever the acts of general disaffection, their power ceases. They have scarcely any executive power and can do but little without the concurrence of the subordinate chiefs and principal men. So the part that I wanted to highlight there was when he says the chiefs are the heads or fathers of their respective tribes. Back then, when he was talking about tribes, that he meant actually clans. At that point, that's how he used the word tribes. It's their clans. And then the other part that he talks about later is that each of these tribes have their own territories, and that they watch over those specific territories. So there's a lot in what he's written down in that history. It's called the History of Ojibway People, with a special reference to their conversion to Christianity. That's what the book is called. And then if you just go to Internet Archive on the internet, that's where this book will be, and you can read it for yourselves. Anyway, one of the things was years ago I found this document, and this was from Chiging, and this was the original Debaske from Chiging, who signed the 1862 treaty, but he didn't sign the 1836 nor the 1850 treaty. But his fellow chief, Bem Guneshkang, at that point in time signed the treaty, and Bem Guneshkang was living in Chiging at that time. And then also the fellow Mesquazo and Beboanang signed that 1850 treaty. I don't know where this Debaske was at that time that he didn't sign this. But one of the things here, I found this letter in 1877, and even then, like, of course, this is kind of pretty current because we just went through this. But here he says, "My father, I write to you today to let you know my thoughts, as I am touched by your compassion for me, who is called a Anishinaabe, and for all the Indians who possessed this land when it was ceded. This land, I might add, that the Great Spirit had given me to live on. Sometimes my eyes fill with tears when I stop and think of my children. I speak for all my fellow Indians. I wish to speak to you about the payment, the annuity. I don't yet see all that you paid me when I ceded the mainland. At that time, you said you wanted to treat me well. A large number of my fellow Indians have not yet been paid, even though they should have been paid for their property. May they all receive a little money as I receive some. All of those, I mean, who have not been paid. We, the chiefs, are basically ashamed. Our children, that is to say, the men whose chiefs we are, regard us with envy when they see us receive a little money. We therefore wish that they too receive the same treatment. What will the person who is not paid live on? I mean, the person who, like me, had property in the land, what will he live on?" So that's what he wrote in 1877. And then he takes that further again when he says that our children, that is to say, the men that we are the chiefs of. So this idea of the chief being a father, and this kind of has a historic precedent because at that time, different bands actually, when they went out to the wintering grounds, "Miode gi bebonshawat goje nopming." When they went out to their winter camps, then it was literally an extended family that went out there. And usually the chief was the oldest guy there. And sometimes what he went was, his band was actually usually his children. And so he literally could have been the father of all that band. Of course, he wasn't all the time, but he would have been, and that's where this kind of paternal responsibility towards the band members, what the bigger part to look at it is that you actually see that it's you're actually a father to all the band members. So that's how they used to describe this relationship, and that they couldn't do. It wasn't an authoritative father that the Jaganashak had, or the Wemptagoji had, or the Anma had. It wasn't the father laid down the law and everyone had to do what the father said. But it was that when the children asked their father of anything, the father had to exert himself to provide that. That's what he had said. So again, this petition that he wrote it to the Governor General, and it was written in French. And then he talked about his father, Debaske, talked about his father, Nibalcom. And Nibalcom was the chief that fought during the War of 1812. And then he just said, I could write more about Nibalcom, but I'm going to talk about my grandfather, Oga. And Oga is a pickerel. And he says, the more stories are told of Oga, of all the accomplishments that he was able to do for us and for our people. And then he wrote down this story in French of what Oga had done. Anyway, we didn't have that story in French. I had the document in French, and I finally got a friend that translated who could read French. And so they translated it. But by then I had recorded my Mabadasha Bejignichke Zenba Na Mitba. This fella, his name is Louis Debaske. I recorded him talking about this story, and I said, we want to record these stories in Anishinaabe. So Luigi let me record them. We had a TV channel in Chiging called TV 22 at that time. So he told the story about that. Anyway, that after I had the story translated from Ojibway into English, and he told about Oga and Nibaakum. And then we translated this document from French, and it was the same story. It was remarkable how much detail was passed down through oral tradition. But that's what's been interrupted, and that's the thing that we got to try and reinstitute in our communities. Is this oral tradition that people listen to each other, talk to each other, pass on these stories to each other, and that's like what I said in the beginning. Oh, now I'm getting stuck on the word. The Bajmatadame. Oh, that last one was supposed to be in my head. So that's then this thing with against the Debaske then ends up taking this paper and the documents that he has to the Indian Affairs Office in Mantuaning, and he goes there in March 1st of 1877, and he brings chiefs from Wiki. So he brought Tama Kanoshmeg and Louis Wakagijik, Ojik, and Jean-Baptiste Flamand, and Nixanten Wawashkesh, and the Sinaway. So Debaske says to the Indian agent, I have brought the chiefs to you and give you the papers in your hand. We want you to help us to send this letter to the Governor General. I will tell you about it. You always hear me what I say and what I think. I am poor myself, and we are all poor. We are getting scarce of land now. Formerly there was plenty. I have only got my reserve now. I will tell you about it because I don't know how my Indians are to live. The money is not received by all, and I want all the Indians to get the Robinson Treaty annuity money. The Indians helped the white men in their fights, and were told that they should never want. Many Indians who are entitled don't receive money, and I will continue to ask for this until my request is granted. So that was an interesting council, because what somebody brought there a medal, and that medal had the date 1764 on there, and on the one side of the medal, of course, was King George III's profile. And then on the other side was an Anishinaabe and a Jaganash, Namadebewok, Nama Mitagong. So they're sitting under a tree, and there's a fire beside them, and they're passing a pipe to each other. But that's actually a reference to this 1764 wampum belt and that 24 Nations wampum belt. But I'm not here to talk about that at this point. So that's the overall thing about roles and responsibilities, is that a chief was to look at the band as a father does to his children, and to help and provide for them. The other thing why I mentioned so much about the Debaske and Oga, Nibaakum, and Debaske, these guys were all of the Caribou clan. And at first, we didn't know that, and people had lost what the clan was. And even my late friend, Louis Debaske, he said that he thought it was turtle. And then one of his cousins said it was a thunderbird. Anyway, through the archival research that I did, I said it's a caribou. And then I showed them Oga signed the St. Joseph's Island Conveyance in 1798. And he also signed the 1781 Michilimackinac Treaty, and both times he used a caribou. And then Debaske, when he signed the 1862 treaty, he just used the hoof print of that caribou, and that's what a lot of the chiefs did afterward. So the other important thing is this particular quote is by a fellow named William Gebewose. And this Gebewose family were the Crane clan chiefs at the time, but they, in a sense, they allowed, from what I read and what I heard from people at Garden River, they allowed Shingwakons to become the head chief there, even though these guys really were the ones that were the Crane clan chief. And it was because Jingwakons was such a powerful person, and Apchigogi Nata Gigda or Jingwakons, that he was such a great orator, but also that he fought during the War of 1812, and he was they say Miao Sewenen, war captain, war chief. So anyway, he had great influence, but the Gabeose family were the ones that actually were part of the old Crane clan chieftainship around Baoting area. And so this fella, they kept this oral tradition going, this William Gabeose and his brother George. So he says, the Guagane is George Gabeose. These stand in the 18th generation. The Guagane, the chief after whom George is named, was chief when America and England were at war. He went to Niagara at the time and made an agreement with England. England promised to grant presents to his people every year till the end of time. A round medal was given him, circular object denoting that the friendship would never end. So that's why those medals are important, and that's why those medals go with these belts as well. They actually act as mnemonic devices for the chiefs to actually recall the promises and the speeches that were told, and all these promises that were made. But William Gabeos, I didn't put this up there, his name was Jigwakons as well. So even though they're at the same time, they both have this name, but it's the perpetuation of these names and the handing down of these names. That's how the history is passed down. And we do this to a certain extent in English now. You're named that, somebody's named after your, maybe Dominic here is named after his grandpa Dominic. I don't know that, but maybe that's what it is. Or maybe Levi is named after his uncle Levi. But then you have this relation where you're named after somebody. And then it's like, this is why you're named that. So in this sense, though, there's a pictograph at Agawa Canyon, and people call it this mine guns panel. And this mine gun, me mawa mine gun, miao seunene, he was a war chief. And then gi mi gan on the Nodawin, he fought the Nodawik. And when he fought the Nodawik, though, these wars that we had weren't just physical battles. They were spiritual battles as well, and they called on their nidok to come and assist them. And then that's why they would paint Gishkap Kang Dasha Mzinbige Wakunda Nishnabek, Gete Nishnabek, Gi Mzinbige at Gishkap Kang, Gajwebuk. Whatever had happened, that's what they painted on that cliff face, and that's what they said, well, this is who came and helped me, and they put that up there. Eh? Anyway, when that fella died, Mine Gun, when he died in 1671, they ended up, the Jesuits write about this Feast of the Dead that happened at, and they spelled the name Oubitch Oujiouan. So when you use, from my grade 6 French, I know that when we say oui, that means yes, but they spell oui in French O-U-I. So you know that O-U means a W. So when you look at the way they spelt that word, it actually means Waawiindamaagewin. Okay, Waawiindamaagewin. And that's what they said in 1671 on an island opposite, and they used the Huron word for Manitoulin. At Waawiindamaagewin, they held a Feast of the Dead. The occasion of this Feast of the Dead is the death of a chief named Mine Gun. And his Mine Gun was successful against the Nodawik numerous times. And so his son is hosting this Feast of the Dead because he wants to tell all the people that he is now to take Mine Gun's name. And he's taking Mine Gun's name, but he's also taking his role and hopefully his prestige. Anyway, the son of Mine Gun ends up signing the 1701 Great Peace of Montreal with the Beaver Clan, and it says Chief Mine Gun of the Amikwa people. So that's how they would perpetuate the deeds of people, of their ancestors. And so that's how Louis de Bosque ended up learning that story from his grandfather, who was called Oga in Chiging. So this guy was Oga in Chiging for, his name was Joe P. de Bosque, but he was chief for many years in Chiging, but everyone just called him Oga. And then his kids were called Oga Sak. Anyway, when I was a kid, there was one old man, and that's what we called him, Danga. And I thought that was I didn't know that was two names. I just thought that was one name, Danga, because everyone said Danga. But I didn't know it was Dan Oga, that is named after that pickerel. So that's how they perpetuate that. And probably many of you in this room have an ancestor with a name that is worthy of perpetuating and carrying that on. And this, me mandana keing bimiwjikadek. This is how this is carried on and carried forward by learning those names and then giving those names as well. And then, but not only just giving the name, but telling the accomplishments that go with that. And that's what these people did. And here you see, it says the 18th generation. That's how strong it was. But this was in 1916. Anyway, here's the words that our people have in Anishinaabe for leaders. And it's just, these are just generic names. Niganzajik, Naganzajik, and Niganzajik. That's the leaders, Naganzajik. But that Nigani, he walks in front, takes the lead. We were in Nidawaaning there, Emnokmik, this past spring. We had this gathering there at the Mantuaning where the Anishinaabe still hold that land. And Gibazindwa Maba Edna Manitwabi, she talked about when she came back to Weequampong to find out some of the teachings. And she talked about that she went to visit Gijaman Samozalmikaban. She went to go visit this late fellow named Samozalmik. And then that she started asking, and then she said, that's what the first thing Sam said, Mi Maba Sema Niganit. This tobacco leads the way, is what she was told. And anyway, when she said that, I thought that was a really nice, it struck me. It was a nice teaching. Niga niwa sema, that tobacco takes the lead. And then we have a name, still our former Grand Chief, and people now say Niganob. It could be, this is where English gets, the English language and the alphabet gets in our way. So Nigan, the letter O is often used for that long ah sound in Anishinaabe. So that word, that name, I suspect that name is Niganabe, sitting in the front. And that's a name you see out in the Minnesota area as well. Sits in the front. And then to me that means that when in the lodge there, where people are sitting up at the front with the drums. Anyway, Niganagabo, you probably know people that with that name. Nigano said he walks in front, but that's also a name for the war chief. And then Nigan Bato, and that's when the war chiefs they start losing the battle. Then he's running back home first. And then Nigan Ashe is he's sailing in the front. And of course now we have this name, and this is where the letter O actually works for us, because we all automatically say Naganash here, and that's what but it really should be Naagaa, Naganash. But that's the naming practices. They would drop that final I on these names ending with Ashe, instead of saying Naganashit or Bebamashit. They just say Bebamash and Naganash, and that refers to, you can think of it as that goose in the front, but it isn't really that, but it's that goose that's flying in the front of the V. Niganashe wa naka. And then it also refers to sailing, if there's a regatta, and they're going, but I guess a regatta is more for canoes. Anyway, here, of course, you make all these words. This is how our language works. You flip these word parts called morphemes to get a different meaning there. So now out west, here we still say Ogima for our chiefs, even if they're elected. But out west in Kenora area and in the Manitoba area, they'll say Ogima Khan. And when you put that Khan at the end of it, it has this implication that it's not it's a faux one, like, kind of thing. It's not the hereditary chief. It's the one that's elected. So that's what they say. Ogima Khan, Ogima Khan akode, epengishmak nakea, nishnaveka kidawata. That's what they say over there. And then, of course, if somebody's bossy all the time, they say Ogima Kaza. He acts like a chief. That's the word. And then Ogima we, he is the chief. You add we to any word like that. And Ogima wadze. That adze is the same for bimadze, your life, You're living, bimadze. He or she is alive, bimadze. Gima wadze, he has a chiefly nature, characters. Inadze is the other way. And many of you have probably seen this in names of programs, Nishnabe adze, Nishnabe adzewin. So it's the same thing. You put that adze, and you can say Jaganashi adze, Wantagoji adze, Anma adze, and you hear Gokosh adze, that they hear that too. So, and then Ogimawa at this now I'm just reminded this where this also in Chiging, our first Indian Act election was 1897, and they wrote this letter in Ojibway, and the fella that won the election was named Raphael Waawiindamaagewin, and then they signed the thing, and it said Ojibway Raphael Waawiindamaagewin, and then they said there the Nishnabek here Gima kewak mampim chiging Gima we ego me Nishnabek. He says they made me the chief here. And then he listed their Ogima, and it said Raphael Waawiindamaagewin, and then it said next one, An Ke Ogima, Noate Gijik was that guy's name. And then it said Mejinwe, Bien Emstanong, and that's Peter Armstrong. So at that first election, they actually put on their, when they're notifying in Ojibway, they said the word Mejinwe, the chief's attendant or the chief's assistant. So they actually elected a chief, the one who's going to be the chief's assistant. I'll get to that word later. Anyway, so you see there's a Gimake, and then in red it says We Gimaket, and that's the one of the chiefs from French River area. That's his name, We Gimake, chief maker, one who makes the chiefs. Gima Kandan, Gima Kandawat, Gima Kandawe. So here's that, these are the offices of our, historically. So that Mejinwe, and that's the one that I was telling you about, that in our first election, they actually put there Mejinwe. And then you read, if you read, get to read a lot of different archival stuff, then you'll see that in Weequamkong on January 6th, when they would have that Nimkodading, Midwezaging, they said that the Mejinawek went around and distributed the drinks to all in attendance, as well as food. So to me, the Mejinawe is different than the Oshkabewis. And here's where we can, things get blurred in a sense, because the Ogima, when he's acting as Ogima for the community, he relies on his Mejinawe. But oftentimes back then, the Ogima was also, could have been the spiritual leader. And if he were leading a ceremony, then when he's leading a ceremony, then it's the Shkabewis that helps him. So to me, that's the distinction. But when a chief was both, and if you read a lot of these older things, they say the chief is usually leads the ceremonies and the hunting parties and the war parties, but not all the time. So if he and then he employed a speaker usually. Netawet is an older way of saying it, and then Netagigadat for the orator or the speaker. And now this still lasts in our communities. We say gigido and nenok for counselor, gigido and nenikwewok, the female counselors. Anyway, that just literally means gigida is speaking, and then gigido and then a speaking man. So that's the other word for the orators. But sometimes the chief, everyone knew who the chief was, but sometimes somebody was more eloquent, and they say the speaker gets up to will say what our wishes are. And so this is also where things got blurred, is because that speaker would get up and say the sentiments of the community or the band or the chiefs, and then the British or the Americans or the Wemtagojik ended up saying, oh, that's the chief. But that was just the speaker. So that's part of our governance structures that we kind of are researching and hopefully reinstituting. So I know I've said this before, but that Ogima Gigida, that was a Anishinaabe name, chief speaker. But it's also a role, and it's not a hereditary role, and it's not a role that is temporary. So I said this before, that when we name these grand chiefs, especially with the Union of Nishnawbek, we should call them Gimal Gigida, that they speak for the chiefs, but not necessarily for all of us people, that they're representing the chiefs at a different council or at a different table. So, and then I already talked about Anke Ogima, no Dogin, that's the one, the messenger, but this is the one that actually is deliberately sent to a meeting, and they memorize and they use these belts. They memorize the talk that was given, and so when they hear that, they hear it, and then they memorize it. And then sometimes at different meetings in the past, they used to have 2 or 3 of these guys, and so one memorized the first part, second the middle part, and then the third the last part. And then they come back to their community and they recite all that was told. So that's that no dogging, the messenger, and he kind of gives it word for word. Then these are words with warriors to do with war. Meow said, and that meow said it means he walks exactly, and that's the war chief. Migazo and then a warrior, but that also just sounds like somebody at the bar after the end of the night, or a boxer. But Minisino, some say that Minisino means a hero or warrior, and Minisino, they latch on to that Minis, that it means an island, that he's an island unto himself, kind of thing. And then Mongodas, that's also a word that they said meant a hero. And Mong, of course, some translated this as meaning loon-hearted, like a Mong meaning the loon. But Mong also means wide or great when you say that. And then Ogichida. So Mongodas, Ogichida, and Wedase. So many of you in here know Pat Madabi. That's the name that they gave him, Wedase, and that means a brave or a warrior in this area. And this is likely, like what Nelson was saying, is likely an Odawa word. And that Ogichita, that's more used out in the western parts. It used to not be used this way. In our area, especially down in southern Ontario, there's Mongodas was used more. But that word actually started to become obsolete. Anyway, if you look in that, das is the enda, and dase, that there's something going on with those 3 words about the warrior. And then Jimalganish, of course, now we say that for soldiers. And Jimalgan, that was an old word for a lance, that like a spear that the warriors used to use. So this fella, his name was Gagage Benesse. Gagage. Of course, there's people in Weequem Kom Giabe Meodon we knows when Gagage, and That's their surname. But usually it has something else attached to it. So in this case, this fella's name was Galgage Benesse, forever or everlasting bird, thunderbird, a raptor. It's not a Beneshi. So that's one of the things that Beneshi is just a small bird, and Benesse is like a raptor, a larger bird. And then that is also a word for thunderbird. So here in this area, we say Nimki Ka when it's thundering, and that just literally means there's lots of thunderers about. And so out west, what they say is Benesi Ka. There's a lot of thunderbirds about. They're just, and if this were springtime, we'd say is Gimme Ka. There's a bunch of mosquitoes out. So it's really, that's really what you're saying, but we take it to mean it's thundering. So this fella, Galgage Benesse, he became a chief at Fort William. Ka Ojibway, that's what that river is called over there. And Goding dashin gi jione gok yamagak jisakan gi bindige ni boa ema gi wab mak gi jgo nenewak nishna beng jinagzawak apje minotagzawak nagamoat eko gi jgo wang gababa anabia eko gi jgo wang gababa anabia eko gi jgo wang gababa anabia eko gi jgo wang gababa anabia. So he said when he was fasting, he fasted numerous times, and he says every day, not every day, but when I was a kid, oftentimes my father would come up to me and git konan nagan, minwan git konan kakaje. He'd come to me and he'd be holding food on a plate in one hand, and on the other hand he'd have charcoal. And he'd present that to me. And the meaning, what we say is, Nuim kadeke, I'm going to make black. And that's the word for fasting. But some people say kadeke, and that also works. But the historic practice was when you would take that charcoal and you'd mark yourself that you're fasting. So that's what the old custom is. You'd get up and you'd present your child with, are you going to fast today? So he said, when I was a young kid, go gijik, minwa go debik, go at gim kadeke. When I was just a young child, I'd practice, he said, and I'd do one day and one night. And I wouldn't even drink the gonabo. I wouldn't even drink the snow water and or let snow onto my tongue. And so, and then as I got older, nijugondash, Gim Kadeke. And he says, so finally, when I became a young man, that's when I fasted for 4 days. Then he says, later on, Binish Shwasogan, Binwadash Binish Madasogan. Then eventually I fasted for 8 days, and then again another time, 10 days. So these are the kind of fasts that they did back then. And one time when he was fasting, that's what he said, that he was taken away by the Gijigowanenowak, and that's sky people. He said, they took me away when I was fasting. And when they took me into that Jiskan. And that Jiskan is called a shaking tent. That's where they took him. And he says, when we went in there, these sky men, they looked like Nishnabek, he said. And when they took me in there, he said they sounded really nice the way they sang. And he says, as far as the sky goes, the extent of the sky is where I have been around to see. I've gone all around to see. So that's what he was shown. Mi enwekinwe shwi madzia ga onje enabindama. Minwan goding gi ogushamoya. That's another way of saying kadeke, gi ogushim. You're fasting, gi ogushim. Gi wabendan with you, keche ishpadanak. I saw a great mountain. Mi dishwe de wabmak metik bedak zutta gadake gikiwe onatik. And on top of this mountain, I saw a tree that was standing there. It was a flagpole. Wasa king ozab menagoze gikiwe on ogode ema from far off, this flag could be seen. Ima dashkidarjiu, mi ima gi Waawiindama niboa no kajagan. And there, that's where I saw a lot of tools. Kakanage mi jim, anochijanagok, and various kinds of food, jonyage, and silver items. Miwe gadayim ngiek. That's yours, is what I was told. Ewa jiu natam ago Bangui-kak, Banama dashwede spiming ajbikowan, Misaga onje nabindama, Nidongi enenemik nishnabek, Je enenemawat, Je ogimawaya. So that's the main part there of this narrative. And he says, when I approached that hill, he says the first part was sandy. And then when I got higher up, it was rock. And then on top, of course, is the flagpole. And all these tools and all these utensils are all around there, and silver and food, all these different offerings. But he said that the reason I saw that was the Spirit said that the Anishinabek would consider me or want me to be the chief. And so when he was fasting, he was told that he would become the chief. And that's why I wanted to talk about this kind of roles and responsibilities. When we now, a lot of people, this is coming back, of course, the fasting and that we do, but it's kind of this other thing where he was always tempted to do that with this kind of purpose of you're going to be a chief or a leader in some way. And that you fast to find out what your destiny could be, or what gifts are being offered to you, and then you got to work to activate those and to accomplish those. It doesn't just happen. You don't just fast and then and sit back. I'm going to be the chief. You got to actually continue to work at it. Anyway, and wekengi bama this opportunity minweneme gok bema zajik gaba wab magwa. So he says, I've traveled all around everywhere, and everywhere I go, I'm liked. So he must have had a lot of money. Just kidding. So that's the thing too, that last line at the bottom, koe da znagidza. Znagidza, we mkadeke ya, we mkadeket, he says there. Koe da znagidza, we mkadeket. That you continually have to make it a hard time for yourself to fast and to accomplish and this is just basically what, like this is kind of a Anishinaabe way of saying no pain, no gain. Really, that's really what that would mean. No pain, no gain. But znagidza we makadeket. You make it hard for yourself to fast by fasting. So here's the part where you're going to say, you talked about this last year. But this is a thing that fascinated me, and I started reading a new book, another book, and this book is called What Jane Knew. And Jane is the wife of Henry Rowe Schoolcraft, and Henry Rowe Schoolcraft was an Indian agent in the Chumokman King Gi Dinaki Ode Baoting. So this fellow, he married Anishinaabe Jane, and she could speak Anishinaabe, of course, and her mother was Susan Johnston, and this Susan Johnston married John Johnson. But Susan was the daughter of Waabujik, who was a great war chief. Anyway, this is also in a book, on the Internet Archive. You can just check that out. And when you read Schoolcraft stuff, and then you read, sometimes people will disparage him, that, of course, he was, they'll say these stories, he filtered them or whatever. And so that's what I kind of thought as well. Anyway, this book, What Jane Knew, is actually showing how much this Schoolcraft actually ripped off his wife and his wife's siblings. So his brother-in-law, William Johnson and George Johnston, they wrote down stories in English and a bit of Anishinaabe here and there, but then he just published them under his own name. And he said, this is what I've collected, and these are the stories that the people tell. And so he was trying to make himself the kind of the go-to man on Ojibway people. Anyway, this lady was named Catherine Wabus, but her Anishinaabe name was Waawiindamaagewin. Waawiindamaagewin. And she ended up, I forgot to say that with John Agagage Benesse, he ended up being taught being gifted with the Jiskan. He was a Jiskiwanene, and he was the chief as well. So like when he's doing his chiefly duties, he would have had a Mishinawe, but when he's doing the Jiskan, then he would have had a Oshkabewis, is what I wanted to finish that off with. Anyway, this Catherine Wabus Waawiindamaagewin, she fasted, and if you see on the right-hand side all those tally marks, those are the number of days that she fasted. And she was told by her mother, they lost their father died. So her mother said, why don't you fast for us? Because we've got no support for our lives here anymore. Since your father died and your brother's too young. But if you fast, just keep fasting and hopefully you'll be blessed. And so she fasted, and then she told her, again, she was the same thing. She was presented with that kakage or mijim, that charcoal or the food. And so she ended up, and this actually was the fast though when she had her first menses. That was the time. So she had her first menses, then her mom made that they call it pekan shkodee. They make a different fire, is what they said. So she ends up having this lodge for her. And on the sixth night, and you see on those tally marks, that's when she had that vision. She said, a voice called to me and said, poor child, I pity your condition. Come, you are invited this way. And I thought the voice proceeded from a certain direct distance from my lodge. So the one there is, that main circle is her with the big ponytail. She's in that lodge, that's where she's fasting. And then she said that she saw a line that goes right straight out, and she said it was like a silver, found a thin shining path like a silver cord, which I followed. It led straight forward and it seemed upward. So if you can imagine, she's fasting in this lodge, and then there's this thin line and it's glowing. So she looks out the lodge and she sees that thin line, so she starts following it. And then when she goes out there, she starts walking, following that thin line. Then she sees on her right-hand side, she sees that's a moon with the flame. The big keys is a gojing. They said a new moon and a flame was coming out of that. And then she said on the other side, that was a gizis. And it was right approaching the sunset. And she said inside that sun was a man, and he was holding something that I think was a book. So then the next one, she came along, and she said she met Gagage Bikwe. Gagage, again, that's that word, Gagage, everlasting or forever. And then that's what the name was, everlasting woman. That's who she met. And she said, she told me her name and said to me, I give you my name, and you may give it to another. I also give you that which I have, life everlasting. I give you long life on earth and skill in saving life in others. Go, you are called on high. So she was told to keep going, but she was given that name, Gagagebikwe. And then she was given the right to give that name as well. And also, when you're given the right to give the name, you give the gifts that are associated with that name and the power that's associated with that name. You're given that, and that's what she was given. So then next, the fellow with the horns there, she says she met a male spirit, Nido Waninis, little man spirit. And he said, fear not, my name is Nido Waninis. I give this name to your first son. It is my life. Go to the place you are called to visit. So again, she's given a name, but also the power that goes with that name and the abilities that go with that name, and that she's to bestow that upon her first son. So then she continues on, and she meets this next spirit. The principal spirit revealed to her was called the Jawano Gijik. That's the one with the halo and the emanating rays, and then that checkered shirt. I could see that it led up to the opening in the sky. When I heard a voice standing still, I saw a figure of a man standing near the path, whose head was surrounded with a brilliant halo, and his breast was covered with squares. He said to me, "Look at me. My name is Waawiindamaagewin, or the bright blue sky. I am the veil that covers the opening in the sky. Stand and listen to me. Do not be afraid. I am going to endow you with gifts of life and put an array that you may withstand and endure." So this idea, the veil of the sky, Waawiindamaagewin, I've heard that name numerous times, and I just thought it meant bright blue sky, and that it was going to be nice prospects. You know how we think of a bright blue sky; everything's going to be nice and that. But in this version, he's actually the one that holds the veil before you go to the opening, and that's that Waawiindamaagewin, and that's what that at the very end, the left side, it says Waawiindamaagewin, and that's the hole in the sky. And this is the hole in the sky that is what we call what they call Pleiades, that constellation, Pleiades. So an orifice in the heavens called Waawiindamaagewin, that is good, meaning my trial of these points. So below him, you see that circle, and there's like arrows pointing in. And she said part of her vision was that these little quills, porcupine quills, were put into her body by that spirit at first, and she said it was annoying. And then the next, they put in nails, and then the next one were awls. So they put magos son tash. They used the magos. They put those awls in her, and then they had gawayek. They had those gawayek, the quills from a porcupine. So she withstood all that. And then after, he says, then you pass the test. So this was before the movie Dune. I'm just kidding. If you guys watch that, that's what they do in Dune. They poke them before they get to the next level. So anyway, he says, you will see the length of days advance a little further, said he. I did so and stood at the commencement of the opening. You have arrived, said he, at the limit you cannot pass. I give you my name, you can give it to another. So again, there's this precipice that she's brought towards, and it's the Waawiindamaagewin who kind of opens that veil or that curtain. And then she looks out and she can see that hole in the sky, and this, of course, is a portal, what the Anishinaabeg view. So then after that, he says to her, okay, you've passed. Now you return. Look around. There's a conveyance for you, and you see that long kind of fish-like creature that's upside down. She jumps on the back of that, and she's brought back home. And then she's sitting on this. She calls it a fish in the sky, and that's what brought her back. And then she sees that point again, and then she says she saw an orbicular spirit resembling a flying woodpecker. And then below that, you see it says meme, and it looks like a lion's head. That's that meme. That's the people always say bapase, and that's just a general word for woodpeckers. But the big one with the red, white, and that on their head, with the big one is meme. So then she's brought back down, and then she doesn't do her G-con. She doesn't set it up till she's a bit older. People know that she had this vision. And then one time, Nguringiye gib kadewaat gundak nishnabek, Ojibway nishnaben. So at that time, they're out and they're starting to get hungry. They're hungry. And then that's when some of the older guys say to her mother, ask her to do her tent, to set up her G-con. And can she, we are asking you if you let her to do the G-con. So she says that, well, we can try it. And this was the first time that she tried it. And what they ended up doing in her particular way was that she was given 10 poles. She had to set up 10 poles, but they had to be 10 different species of trees. And then they wrapped it around, and then it started to shake. So anyway, all this to say that, when I looked at this on its own, I put those, without my children's help, I put those names on there to help me. But I didn't know the name, I didn't recognize these Nidok myself. And that's the part that when we get those, if we get those kind of messages and scrolls, as well as our records, that's what we have to aspire to actually understand and learn. And then that's why I'm showing you this. But this is, of course, a drawing, but it was made, she made the drawing on charcoal on birch bark. And she showed Jane this drawing. I don't know where the original is anymore, but they took that drawing and then they did it on paper, and they said a faithful reproduction. But, of course, I knew the tally marks were the number of days that they're fasting. And then there's a Waawoos there, and that's she ended up marrying that fella, and that's why she has that name there, Waawoos. But that's what we, to me, on the one hand, gi kegano na mawa Levi nichke gi widebema. So I'm sitting there with Levi this morning, and he was asking me if I read the Supreme Court's ruling yet, and I said no. And he was saying that there's a lot in there that we have to read and understand, and that's true too. There's so much demands on us now that we have to actually read and understand that, but we have to actually read and understand this too. So that's our challenge here is to do justice to both. And that's why, like I said earlier at the beginning, if we all did a part and we all put it in here in our understanding, then we're able to go further. So again, this is another fasting. This fellow was named Amos, little B. And then they depict who's what the different Nidok that came and blessed him when he was fasting. Amos. At the time that he's fasting, and then he's visited by all these different Nidok. And then now we would just say that's the rainbow, but back then that's the arc of the sky. They call it the Mashawogijik, and there's 4 layers of the sky that people, of course, Nishnawik here have heard this before. But you see that kind of that wheel with the spokes up only one way. Jibemokse is what that song was, and that means I am rising. I am rising, and this represents the rising sun, and intimates to the warrior the vigilance and activity required on the business of which he goes. So again, the end of this other fellow's record of his fasting, he wrote the sun there, number 5, and then he shows the number of days he fasted. Then he shows himself with a big heart that he was brave enough. He had the bravery and the constitution to finish that fast. And then number 7, he says, is the rising sun. And it's a good omen when you finish your fast that the sun rises in such splendor, and it means that it's all that will occur. I like my accent on that last. So Mabadasha Jaguakons, Migoge Dashgi Kadeke, Kim Kadeket Nibnaching, Mava Jaguakons. So this fellow, too, who we have to thank, we have to updexa because the government was just going to go right through this. They weren't going to bother making a treaty, and it was him and his son-in-law that stood up and said, "No, you didn't ask us." And all these miners that are up here prospecting, they didn't ask us. They're just coming up here and doing this, and that's not right. And we want our share from that. And he says, I see what they're taking, but that's ours, and you haven't come and made a treaty with us. So they had to really work hard to get that treaty going. Anyway, so he also fasted numerous times. And he ended up saying that visited Schoolcraft, and Schoolcraft said a chief by the name of Jigwakons came, but he has a French look about him because he has a tuft of hair on his chin. Mishadam Kane or Jigwakons. He's got a tuft of hair on his, and he looks of the French persuasion. But he's a man of some consequence, he says, being a Wabano, a Medewa Nene, and a war chief, he says. And now he's a chief there, and he presented wampum to me, and we smoked a pipe, he said. So then this Schoolcraft was really interested because he said Jigwakons has numerous wigwasabakon, and that's the word for those scrolls, wigwasabakon, where you keep your records on the birch bark. So he kept those and the records of what he had done, and he told Schoolcraft that he says, when you are trying to be the jiskiwanene or gishpenwi gozabendang, if somebody wants to be, this is the other word that they would say, gozabendang, to try and predict the future, to divine, I guess we'd say now. And he says, if you do that, you make a record of it, and then you have one of your helpers, you draw out what you saw, and then one of your helpers witnesses it, and then if it comes to pass, you take them to the elders to say, this is what I saw, and this is what came to pass. And then the elders are the one later to tell you that you've then up to another level. So he had a number of these wigwasabakon, his records. But reportedly, those got destroyed. Jibwa nabut mabadash jigwakons gibenach ton and wigwasabakon. So he got rid of those before he died. Anyway, what he told Schoolcraft at that time too, he didn't reveal his dream. The other thing that people used to say is you're not to tell what you saw during your fast. You don't tell anybody, only the person that is actually overseeing you. If you start telling people, you're giving it away, and you weaken it. You weaken that vision. So that's what he was. Why he wouldn't tell what he saw all the time. But one thing that he did tell Schoolcraft was he said that our people always fasted for knowledge, and he says and blessings. But one of the things that he said they did was he says if they wanted to be a war chief, the nido you sought was the sun. He says if you wanted to be a war chief, the nido you sought was the sun. So this interested me because I thought you wanted to have a bear, something real ferocious and strong, and or a fisher, ojik, something that's going to really fight. And then he says the reason you go for the sun is that it sees everything, and it illuminates everything, and nobody can hide from that. And so later on, before he died, he had told some of his children and others that he is an old man by the 1850s. He said that when he fasted, again he heard a voice, and this voice told him, "Jigwakons, you're pitiful, you're poor." And he says, "Come forward." And he said. So when Jigwakons came out of his fasting lodge, again, there was a shining path. He says, this path was shining. And I understood that I had to take this. So he started walking up this shining path. And then as he started following it, it went up into the sky. So he's up in the sky there. And then he sees this big house. And then this guy comes out and he's dressed in white. And this person that is talking to him, and he says, come forward. And he says, look to the east. Look to the east. And he says, so he looked to the east and he saw all those, he says, you see all those tents there? Those are generals and kings and all their men and Humpty Dumpty. And he says, there are all their men there. You too one day will take your place among them. They are strategizing about a coming conflict and also about world affairs. They're all strategizing. And that's one day you will sit amongst them, he told them. So those are great war chiefs, those are generals, sitting there with their soldiers and Odaniman and their men. So he said, when he says, I also give you this, and it was a pendant, Ke'ewin, a flag, like a pendant. So he gave him that. And then he said, go down, and I will always be with you. Panadash Kawiji, I will always be with you. And he says, if you are always with me, meaning he had to, had to feed him, had to give him tobacco and maintain that relationship. So that's why it's important to feast those that blessed you. They'll stay with you till Ekkob Madzian. Anyway, so he comes back down, and as he's coming down that path that's shining, then all these pendants, Ke'ewanan, Ojibway, on either side of that Mikan, on that road, Mikos, he's coming down, then all those flags are there. And then that's when he came back, and then that's what they said. After that fast, he called himself Zogajewelse. And that Zog, of course, means to emerge or come out. And Oju is the mountain. Zogajewelse means he's coming around the mountain. Well, it actually means the sun's emerging up over the side. And that's why they called that Garden River's old bingo hall. Zogajewelse, when that, because those balls come out of that thing. Bingo balls. But that's what the name means, Zogajewelse. And that's what that sun, that symbol is, that sun coming up. And that means it's a propitious dream. And then also that it's going to happen. So that's what he was blessed with, was this being a strategist. And then, but before he became the war chief and his numerous fasts, he served under different chiefs. And then that's when at one time, he was a Mijinoe. And then at another time, he was also a Shkabewas. And he at another time was also a Gigodowanene and Natawet. So he served all these different roles before he became the chief. And that's part of that training as well. And so other times you'll read, if you read some of these council proceedings, the chiefs will talk about being told by their father or their grandfather. And that's when they're the ones that's going to be selected to be the chief, and then they're set aside and educated for that. So this is, I always bring this up. This is one of my favorite quotes that he said, and it was in 1829 at St. Joseph's Island. And when I started back in the 2000s, that sounds like 2002, that's 22 years ago. People used to say to me when I'd bring out these belts, not all these, just I had just 4 or 3, whatever. They would say to me, what are you doing? We don't have wampum. That's a Mohawk thing. You're Anishinaabe, you're not doing, that's wrong what you're doing. So when I started out, then I had to tell people, no, we used wampum too. But at first they didn't believe me. And eventually they started to believe it, and I started showing them these snippets here, like here holding a few strings of wampum in his hand and said, Father, the great master of life, gave us pipes and wampum for the purpose of conveying our ideas from man to man. I return thanks to the Great Spirit that made me, and to my great Father, the King, who supports me. What he promised to our forefathers, he continues to perform. He is charitable to the Redskins, not the team, to us. Meskazajik. So that's his totem there. And then again, this is another favorite of mine. It says, but this is in Mantuaning at the distribution of the presents. And this is about that belt with the ship, with the 24 men, and that ship, they told us would never be empty. It says, we salute you, we beg of you to believe what we say. For although we cannot put down our thoughts on paper as you, our wampums and the records of our old men are as undying as your writings, and they do not deceive. So again, this is, what I'm trying to talk about here is that we have our own records. And the records that we had were removed from us sometimes. And in this guy's case, sometimes he burnt them. He got rid of them and he didn't pass them on. And then others, they're in museums or private collections. And then like with the wampum belts, we had to remake them from different sources that we read, and archival sources and others. We had to reconstruct this archive. And so I'm glad you got my buddy here, Brian, to talk about this later on. Brian Charles from Georgina Island. So that's what they said. But this was part of learning to become a chief as well, was to learn the records of our old men. That's the roles and responsibilities of our chiefs, to learn the records of our old men. And it doesn't mean just the papers that are handed to us from Indian Affairs. It actually means those strings of wampum, those pipes, and those belts of wampum, as well as those scrolls and those songs that go with it. All of this is a whole package that we have to learn. And in the old days, the ones that were going to be the chief, they're the ones that were taught this. They were shown this. And the ones that actually had a propensity or a proclivity, I've always wanted to use those words, that they were the ones then chosen to do this. And then out of that, they were the ones that became the leaders. So this was in 1852. They were actually told in council there, that's when they were informed that the presents would be stopped, that the government was no longer going to deliver the presents as they had promised us in 1764. They said that your promises would be forever. As long as the grass grew, the rivers flowed, and the sun crossed the sky. So I took that speech, and I had, again, Luigi de Baskeba, but I also had my father and Evelyn Roy from originally from Waawiindamaagewin, but married into Chiging. So the three of them and myself, we translated this part of this speech. And this was when they were told that the presents were going to be stopped. Ki non dago ga kidyan, minwa ki debwetago pi gikidyan, kwa ma gizes speming, en sagijgak giowaskone wi gijosh yang, kwa bendanen dan jaushko nibishan, bin sakskak ep gedasen get. Kwabendanen na mishkonsan. Baskonyet tot ke. Nue nebin bindajwang. Kchigadakin. Zitaganagiming nekein. Mbe epiche madzimagak nanda. Gaminago wewzewenan. Debemad don. Mina idik manda. Jine nenjaga demagak. So, Father, we heard your words and we believe when you said, you see that sun above us who shines to light and warm us. You see those green leaves which open out beneath his rays. You see that grass which clothes the earth, those waters which flow from the highlands towards the sea. Well, whilst these things live, your presence shall live. Can it be that this is forgotten? Nos, Kanagi abe de Kanishna be get me on gesik. Pane gaje minuan gozit. We gakche gozuk shkodek jiman. Gat kobedek. Mishkowa wich kenduin. Nen gach kawikabedon. Midashko jibegum shkak. Father, shall the Indian no longer be able to draw home, which it has so often gladdened that amply freighted vessel, which was bound by the strong cord of friendship, merely to agitate which you told him should make it appear. And this is the word that is in the other one. Jichi babi wedon gishpengego gmenezian. If anything is lacking, you just tug on that rope of friendship. So again, that's what for his part, as roles and responsibilities and education of becoming a chief, he had to learn all these belts. Well, not all these, but some of these belts that they had, and then some that he had for himself, and then his own scrolls that he had, strings of belts that he had, pipes that he had, all these different things, these different speeches that he had heard. And that was the other thing that he isn't the only one that learned that. In Chiging, our chief, the one that signed the 1836 treaty, 1850 treaty, and 1862 treaty, his name was Bem Goneshkang. He recited this and had somebody write it down, that whole speech of that Covenant Chain Wampum Belt. And so all these chiefs knew it then, because they gathered in forums like this, but actually it was Mantuaning around the council fire. And when they gathered around the council fire, they fed that spirit, and they smoked together. Gizagaswe, Dawat Gunda, Gima Bananik, all those chiefs that have gone on now, they smoked together. Meanwhile, Shanding Ode, and there was Weekunding. They had a feast, they feasted there, and then they talked, and they recited those belts. And so all of them understood that those belts and the metaphoric language that was used, these guys understood that metaphoric language. But now what's happened is we actually end up learning more legalese rather than the diplomatic language our ancestors used. So anyway, these chiefs have a lot of jobs to do. So this is that painting, and Adam Debosque in Chiging told me about this. We started a program in Chiging called Kinamadok, and it was just because I moved back to the reserve from Toronto after going to school, and then Brian Bisomba, he had come to school here at Laurentian, and he was on council, and then Luigi Ba was there, and then Sam DeBosque. We all got together and we were saying, well, we all learned things at different schools or wherever we went, but we actually, I don't know what you learned. I don't know what you wrote up there. I don't know your essay there. I was saying to Brian Ba, he says, yeah, I don't know what you wrote either. So he said, well, let's just get together. And so we just started as an informal thing, and we just started saying, well, we'll call ourselves Kinamadok. They're teaching each other. Anyway, Susan Hare comes and says, this is just the old boys club. So we were getting these cravats and pipes and all this stuff, tweed jackets with the elbow patches. And anyway, it wasn't supposed to be men only, but it just happened that we just said, well, you went to school, come and talk. Anyway, Adam Dabosky was part of this, and then I was talking about these presents and these belts, and he says, oh, my cousin up in Batchawana has a painting there on their wall. And he never told me the name of his cousin. He brought the painting down, and then I got to take a picture of it. And this is at Mantuaning. And so they finally sunk that ship that's over there. You know, they were, just kidding. That's not the Nora Isle. But that's the ship there, and then that building, That's, these are the places where that 1836 treaty was signed, and then also where the Anishinaabe would gather. And you see those front two rows, they already got their cloth. So everyone used to get, if you were a child, you got a certain amount of cloth for skirts and shirts and leggings. And then same with a woman and a man, you got enough cloth for shirts, and if a woman, skirts. And then the chiefs and others got better quality blankets, but everyone got blankets. So you see there's piles of cloth, they're different colors. And back before the War of 1812 and before the Revolution, these were just big piles, like the best. They were giving us all the best of everything. But then after the war, everything went down, the quality went down. So these people would come from as far away as Fort William and then Nipissing. And so thousands of people would come to Nidawaaning and they'd meet there. So this is a chief here. And Paul Kane painted this, and he did a watercolor, and then he did the oil when he got back to Toronto, the oil. But he listed this guy's name as Meidakame Kinangi, and he said, I hear the sound of a deer, but I can't make that out at all. How that would mean that I hear the sound of a deer, but the Mede part is like you hear something that you don't see, and but Game, I don't know, I can't make the rest of. Anyway, he's called in the Jesuit papers there, the Illinois, and then there's an unflattering council proceeding where Vidal and Anderson go up to Fort William. And then they want the chief there, the young chief, the 40-year-old young chief named Joseph Podesha. And his Anishinaabe name Podesha is Esbanwayan. Esbanwayan is a raccoon skin. That's his name. I guess before Davy Crockett, he had this. So the Jesuits wanted that one to be the chief, but this guy was the chief. And so they kind of disparagingly said, the old chief got up, he's 70 years old, and he said he had a humongous, enormous pipe, and he made us sit there for hours. And he says, but he's just one of these fur chiefs. He's not the real chief. The real chief is Podesha. The people chose him, Podesha. And he says, one of these chiefs, he's always in red. He gets two coats every year, a blue one and a red one. And he says he always wears the red one, and it's decorated with the gold braid and metal buttons, and that's why when he goes away, people call him a skokunye, and kind of like a put down, that meaning the red coat. That so they kind of tease him. He's always wearing this, walking around this, the way the priest wrote about him. That he thought highly of himself, but he had this enormous pipe, and he's trying to light it, but it won't light. And then he ends up getting up. He lights that pipe, and that's these pipes that are called calumet pipes, and the stem is like from your heart to the end of your fingertip. So he has this enormous pipe, lights it up finally, and they all smoke. And then he gets up and he's holding that metal, and then he says, the priest wrote, "Our Nestor of the wilderness traced his origins back to the flood, I believe, or perhaps earlier." And he says, everyone's bored. And this guy is just going on. And he says, then his son-in-law says, okay, that's enough. He says, no, patience. I still haven't finished. And kind of like what I'm doing now. But anyway, he says they were so bored with the speech of such epic dimensions. One of the sons-in-law went up and told him that he'd spoken long enough. Then finally his son said to him, okay, that's enough. And then he says, okay, because the son was actually reminding him this part or that part, telling him what parts he says, oh yeah, that's what I want to say. So anyway, the unfortunate thing to me is what he's actually doing is what our people would do, is he actually said, my father, instead of just being the fur chief, he's actually saying, my father was the chief. And here's what he did, my grandfather was the chief. and here's what he did. Here, my great-grandfather was the chief. Here's what he did. And I wish that priest had written that all down, what that old man had said. And he has this pipe there with that. And so he's telling his whole lineage of why he's the chief and why he should be the one to, why he's important to be there. And then why he wears that red coat and why he holds that medal. Anyway, I read this this book that's called Ojibway Texts, and this guy did a phenomenal job. His name's William Jones. He was a Sauk Indian, Fox and Sauk Meskwaki, and he was a linguist that trained under Franz Boas, and he collected a bunch of stories out in Fort William and out in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And he's got his own writing system, a phonetic writing system, but it's very accurate. And I just transliterated into the double vowel that we do now. Anyway, there's a story in there just called Hero. And, I read of this guy long ago, and I was like, I didn't think of him as a hero. And then that's what the Anishinaabe name is. The English says hero. The Anishinaabe name says Ininaway. And I guess that's what they say for a hero out there. And that's the Anishinaabe pronunciation of Illinois. And that of course, is a nation. The Illinois people, they're related to the Miami Confederacy as well. Anyway, in that story, he says, so him and his son went on a bear hunt. And then when he told his son, set up the camp. I'm going to go upriver to look for a bear. And then he finds a bear. And then he shoots the bear. And the bear falls down, so he thinks that the bear is dead. And he goes up to the bear, but he didn't reload his gun. And then that bear got up and attacked him. And so they're fighting away, and he's getting clawed, and he's getting bitten, and that bear's wounded. And then they're wrestling away, and then he finally remembers he's got this knife. So he grabs that knife, and he stabs that bear in the ribs. Then that bear kind of, from getting stabbed, jolts back. Then he stabs that bear in the heart. And then that bear runs away. Then he falls down, he's dead. But this guy, he's mortally wounded, and his son goes around looking for him, can't find him. Tells you what kind of tracker his son was. Or maybe you want to get rid of the old man. But anyway, he didn't find him, and he's wounded, and he's bleeding. And then the people go out and they look for him, and he's bleeding away, and he's got that knife. And so what he does is he cuts that bear open, and he eats that fat, the bear fat, and that's what keeps him alive. And he's crawling back. Then he says, "Oya ngiwa ma apje dida, ngi odapenik ninjing ngi esik, mi go jit, no jis kawin ka nabosi nongum, ginwesh kap madis, apje da wabshka kashtigwan ngiik, nin nanavojo." So while he's in this state, and in the story, he's starting to rot because he couldn't clean his wounds, and he's starting to stink, and he's crawling along. He's bleeding still, and he can't stop his wounds, and he thinks he's going to die. And then that's what he says. He heard a voice, and then he saw somebody, and he says they're really big, and then they picked him up and they put them in his hand, and then that's what he says. "My grandchild, you will not die today. You will live a long time, and your hair will be white." And he says, "I'm Nanabush." So he says that Nanabush picked him up, and this guy's the chief, eh? So then he says later on, "Get dash apachigin wesh keep matze goban Nanabojon binish gi adan ding ama kichigaming giabe bemadazipan o John in Nineveh." And that's John, Illinois, of the what the Jesuit Fremont had written about so disparagingly. But in this story, how he's remembered by the people, is that he was this hero that fought off a bear and survived, and then was picked up by Nanabojo. And so when we look at these sources, my point is to actually try and get as many sources together and what the people say as opposed to what a priest is saying or what an Indian agent is saying, eh? And then pull those all together. And then to talk about if you're being picked up by Nanabojo, you're pretty sure that this guy fasted as well, and that he participated. Although it says that he did get baptized by a Baptist, but he wasn't And that was why the Catholic priest didn't like him, because he was baptized by a Baptist. And it says he was dunked in the water by a Baptist. And anyway, so I just love this. This is another thing. The Jesuits went to Walpole Island. And they went to Walpole Island. The Indian agent said, yeah, you can set up a church. You can go and cut the trees down and start this off. Anyway, they started cutting the trees down and they started hauling them away and started to make their church. And then this guy, Waawiindamaagewin, and his orator, or Ojibway, they ended up going to the priest and saying, you didn't ask us. Who asked you to come here and do this? You didn't ask us. We don't want this here. And then so they end up coming around again. And he says, the Indian agent said that I could do this. We got permission from the Indian agent and the governor. We don't need your permission. And he says, no, we're going to gather all the elders and the people here together. And he says, Shawano said, I'm going to tell you how we're going to do this. First I'm going to talk, and then you'll get a chance to talk. And then after you talk, then our chief, Waawiindamaagewin, will talk. And then but you won't interrupt. And then you get another chance to respond. And then if I have anything else to say, I'll say it. But you don't interrupt me. Now you watch the CPAC channel and how they all yell at each other and nobody's listening to anybody's full words. Anyway, so when they have this debate, this is what the Jesuits, I'm glad they wrote this down. So what Waawiindamaagewin said, my brother, I love my ancestors' blessing. I certainly cherish them deeply and I want to preserve them carefully. This is how my fire is lit. Emphasis, I added that emphasis, and will continue to make its smoke rise up into the air. Mbapte. Nikane and zok tonwe and get your mishrum suck, Juan mitwinwa. Opchidash go and get your bitendan. Bitendanen. Minwa go ene, nui nagadawendanen. Mi mandan the kea and dishkodem. Ejib skanek. Meanwhile, dash go. Mi go penege napsaea. Spemingje ninaptek. So that's what, again, that's Zenba na mitba. Meanwhile, Nos, meanwhile, Evelyn, they helped me translate that. Well, they did the heavy lifting, I did the writing. And then this is his fellow chief, Ojibway, and this was the one people recognize more because he's recognized, associated with the Kamse. Nin dashe nishnabe Ngitche the Mishomis and Giminik Chipkan the King was Nandawabindama the Waawiindamaagewin. Gaje Meno, Joebazik the Wat, Ngitche Mishomis son, Giminan Manda Getche Pitendagok, Ngitche Mishomis and Giminik Geni the Shangan Keminak, Ndabanojimak. So he's saying there, and I, a native man, I have received from my elder a total different way of seeking the light. And the elders ended up saying not light, they ended up saying Waawiindamaagewin, wisdom in that case. In his kindness to my ancestor, the Great Spirit gave me the precious gift. My ancestor bequeathed it to me, and I shall bequeath it to my children. Another nice word I always wanted to say. So, don't worry, these are the last few slides. This, of course, is the Vidal-Anderson map that they made as their commission went across, and they were demarking the territories in 1848. And but the quote at the bottom, I got this from a book. If any of you are interested, there's a book called Ogimok, Anishinaabe Leadership, and it's written by Carrie Miller, Anishinaabe. She's out at the University of Manitoba, or is it? Anyway, she's out in Winnipeg. So this, she translates this. She says, he's talking about how different chiefs have a certain territory to take care of. And remember that I was saying Peter Jones has said this as well, and George Copway says this as well. But the word she says, these hunting groups were referred by the Anishinaabe term in the Waawiindamaagewin, translatable from a leader's point of view as that which I'm in charge of. So I looked at that word and I was like, I kind of don't think that that's what they said. I wonder where she got this word. So I looked in the footnote to see where she got this, and then she ended up saying that in the footnote that the late anthropologist Rogers, Edward Rogers, who worked at the ROM, he did work up at Round Lake, Nishnawbek territory. And he said that these hunting territories are called, and here's how he spelt it in the footnote, Tipencigewin. So there, that writing system, the C is a J and the T is a D. So it's the Benjagewin is how Edward Rogers spelled the term of that term. So I don't know where Kerry Miller got in the Nockanagewin, but it's to me it's a different term. And of course, many of you know Chinockanagewin, the program that is named here. So to me, the term would be the Benjagewin. And the Benjagay, sometimes you hear. This is some of you still remember that when you went to church, the Benjagay, Jawan Mishanam, and Jesus, Jawan Mishanam, they'll say. And the Benjagay is creator, the owner, the master, the master of the universe. Master of life, I should say. So that's what I think the term is that and I don't know where she got in the Nockanagewin. I got to talk to her yet. But that's what if you remember that beginning slide with Peter Jones, that he said that they are to settle all disputes, the chiefs are to settle all disputes and to care for all that land in their territory. And so this is what the chiefs' responsibilities are here when we look at this. It isn't just the reserves and the territories, but it's taking these all together. So these are the surveys that were done after the 1850 treaty, and one is Teslan, the Serpent River, and Zgamuk and Dokis there. But they were done at different times and with different degrees of information. Miwe, Geg P. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm shopping.